We are going to have a fascinating session with 4 stars. We will concentrate on a time horizon which should be closer to 15 to 20 years rather than the year 2035. Our time horizon will be slightly shorter. And we will first concentrate on technological development at large with Harry Dent, who is identified more or less with the demographic cliff.
Okay. One way or the other, my job today is to predict the future of the world economy in 5 minutes. And fortunately, I can kind of do that because I do not focus, like economists, on all the short-term, fiscal and monetary policies of governments, which are only short-term in nature and constantly change. I focus on the predictable things that people like you do as they age. Life insurance actuaries can predict when we're going to die down to the decimal point. On average, I can predict everything else in life. So that's what I look at. New generations are born about every 40 years, different times in different countries, so I have different forecasts from around the world. The baby boom was the largest generation the world's ever seen, at least for hundreds of years. And so if you can see, okay, here's when people are born. And this, for example, is the United States. This is our birth chart back to when they were measured. I adjust for immigrants since we have a lot of immigrants in our country. Here's when people are born because they can't do all these predictable things unless they're born, right? So next thing I do is I look at, well, when do people spend money? The peak in the United States is age 46. In South Korea and Japan, it's age 47. So I can move forward these birth trends for when people are going to spend the most money and tell you when any economy in the world is going to grow or not. But there's kind of a plateau that's important to understand. Spending rises very dramatically when people enter the workforce at age 20 and to 39 when they tend to buy their largest house. Then they continue to furnish that house, and then they buy cars and everything else. That peaks at age 54. So there's a long plateau. But in the United States, when growth first started to slow with baby boom spending, we had a crisis in the early 2000s, the tech wreck, they call it. We had another crisis when the baby boomers peaked, which I predicted 20-some years ago in 2007. And we're about to see the next big crisis when we really go off what I call the demographic cliff. And that is the title of my book, and it's doing very well in South Korea for reasons I don't understand. So thanks for that. The big decline is coming for a lot of countries, Europe, United States, starting especially in 2016, and nobody's going to see this coming. I predicted the collapse of Japan in 1989 for the entire 90s while the rest of the world would boom just by looking at simple indicators like this. So again, I move the birth index forward for the peak in spending, and I can do it for any country in the world, and we get a very good correlation with the economy and the stock market, decades in advance. Note the only divergence has been in the last several years because governments poured trillions and trillions of dollars into the economy when it started to slow. Note that the echo boom, or the millennial generation, is not as large a wave of people in the United States as the baby boom. Can we go forward? Oh, okay. Now, real quick. If I look around the world, there's countries that have a larger echo boom or millennial generation, usually because of immigration. Countries like Australia or Sweden or Switzerland. There's a number of countries like the United States, France, and the UK, and Canada that have a baby boom nearly as large. I call them sustainers. And then there's countries, the rest of the world, the rest of East Asia, and the rest of Europe and East Europe have declining demographic trends for decades because the next generation is not nearly as large. Let me see if the next slide works better. If I look at this globally, tomorrow morning, I'm going to look at leading countries and some other indicators. But if I just look globally, here's the developed countries all together. They're already peaking and slowing. They're going to slow more in the next 5 years, where I see a downturn in the economy, and they're going to continue to slow for decades unless there's a revolution in having more kids, which is not easy to talk people into in urban areas, or we live a lot longer, which could happen decades from now. Look at the emerging countries, entirely different story. They're going to grow for decades ahead. In the country that's going to be the star of the next couple decades is going to be India more than China. Finally, As Nathan said, we're continuing to urbanize. Now, urbanization is more powerful than even demographics for countries that are not urban yet. The United States, South Korea, we're all urban already, so demographics is more important. For emerging world, urbanization, every time somebody moves from a rural to an urban area, their income roughly triples. That's why China is moving people so fast. Problem is they're doing it too fast. So again, that's all I can say in 5 minutes. The world is going to go to emerging countries, especially Asia and especially India, in the coming decades.
By the way, I know little about Korean politics, but I know that many people would like to change the constitution in Korea, but few people know how to do that. So it's a huge task before us. Who would like to react on this question of interplay of various forces in the next 2 decades or so? Please, Harry.
What I've learned from studying history, the most important impacts of technologies are not the products or services themselves, but they change how and where we work and live. It wasn't just the automobile that was so important, and electrical appliances and phones and all these things in the early 1900s, the last revolution. It was the assembly line that made them mass affordable by Henry Ford. It was the modern corporation from Alfred Sloan. These new technologies allowed that to happen, allowed it to change work. And we stopped living in expensive cities and moved to safer, less expensive suburbs en masse. All of that was due to new technologies. So what I see, the biggest impact in the coming decades, number one, as was being mentioned before, lifespans. Lifespans went up decades between the 30s and 60s because of new technologies. I could see us living decades from now to be 100 plus instead of 80 plus, and that would solve some of the big demographic slowdown and problems I see otherwise. But more important, I look at organizations and say, why can't a company run like the stock exchanges do? What happens in the stock exchanges? Somebody rings the bell 9:30 in the morning and runs and gets the hell out of the way, don't they? The thing runs itself. Users drive. It is a network. Where is the management? You don't see them. Where's the bureaucracy? It's all in the software at light speed. So instead of streamlining top-down hierarchical organizations of the past, which we've been doing for decades, and that's a good thing, what if companies organized around the users and had frontline browser teams that only focused on them? They had all the information they need to know that the profitability of that customer, the profitability of everything you're selling to it, all the rules are in the software. They can make decisions real time on the front lines, and things they can't do is done by backline servers. So people either become frontline browsers or backline servers. You automate all the bureaucracy, you automate the management, and allow people to make real decisions to serve other people like them that they know. And again, Airbnb is a perfect example more of this kind of network economy where in some cases consumers are selling to each other directly, peer-to-peer. So there's major changes I see, and that would do more to make things that aren't affordable today affordable, just like Henry Ford made cars mass affordable. What I see in the future, real-time personalized service that's affordable. That's the big trend in business, and the companies that can do that will dominate their markets more than just the technologies and products themselves.
Well, before I give the floor to the audience, may I ask you to react very quickly because of time on 2 questions which reflect my personal bias, of course, of biases. First, thinking of what Tony Blair said this morning, how do you see all these megatrends affecting the political leadership for the future? What would be how do you see the political animal of the future? Question number 1, and question number 2, war and peace, but warfare. How will it evolve in the next 20 years? But I understand we don't have much time to discuss that. So if each of you would like to say 1 sentence on something you feel particularly important on one of these or 2 or the 2 questions. So who would like to shoot? Thierry, you're always ready, obviously, to shoot.
It's like everything else, everything needs to be more direct marketing. There's a marketing revolution. When companies or politicians or governments can have direct contact with their customers or with their citizens, they can measure their response and get instant feedback. And that's not something we've been able to do in the past. So that'd be the biggest change I'd see in politics as well. Politicians need to get more direct feedback from voters and their citizens, and that can be done every time they say something, every time they come up with a new policy, every time they vote on something. They ought to get direct feedback so that they're more accountable and people feel like they're literally feeding into the process rather than just being kind of like a passive victim of it. But that's true of everything. The more you can have a direct relationship, if you can produce a product or service, or and again, same with government, and have a direct relationship with your customer and measure every step of the way how they're responding and what works and doesn't, you're going to be much more effective, much more efficient, and deliver that kind of customized, personalized service. So it's really, governments end up following the same trends that transform businesses. And the last revolution was a production revolution, assembly line, make standardized products cheaper. This is about having a direct relationship with people and customers and citizens and being able to deliver customized service at affordable prices.
Please, sir.
Gentlemen, I'm from Tatas. My name is KV Rao. I have one question about the less privileged in the world. Half the population of the world, 3 billion people, live less than $2.5 a day. 1.3 billion people live at less than $1.25 a day. 1 billion children are poor. How is life going to change for the less privileged in the next 30 years? And what do we have as a reflection for them?
So, who wants to take this question?
Urbanization is the biggest lever. Most of those people earning that are in rural areas. They have less access to jobs, education, everything. So that's number one. But I know people like in the United States think that China's going to be just like us and have the same incomes and the same size houses. They're not. Very few countries, and South Korea is one of the few exceptions, move from emerging to developed status when they urbanize. Most countries just get a little more, it's more a straight line relationship. They get a little more wealthy as they move people urban and as they grow. And that's the case for India, Brazil, China. They are not going to be as rich as South Korea. So there's still going to be an underclass in the world, but they're going, any country that urbanizes, and even in India, which I've been to like 4 or 5 times now, they are making progress, but they're still poor. But most of those poor people are in the rural areas. India is only 33% urban. China is 56%. So that's a huge difference right there. So urbanization is the number one thing. Education, obviously, is a big deal. And Singapore did a brilliant thing. They are a very mixed country ethnically, and they forced people to integrate. They force people to live in the same neighborhoods from different ethnic groups, and they don't have the ethnic tensions and the disparities that a lot of other countries do. So there's a lot of things you can do to plan and see this coming, but these people living on $2 a day, they may be living on 10 down the road, but they're not going to be making $50,000 to $60,000 a year like people in the United States or South Korea.
So I wish to thank very much the panelists for their excellent contributions. Thank you very much.
The World Knowledge Forum